Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Mykela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Write with Mykela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. I'm hoping to continue to get chapters from you. Don't leave us hanging. If you've already sent, say, chapters 1 through 10, and I'm releasing videos. I'm releasing 2 videos on Tuesday to read your writing from your writing prompts, and 2 videos on Friday to read your chapters for those of you where I have permission to read them on the channel. So basically, your work will be extra videos, but everything else will be the same for my viewers. If you are writing with me and wish to exchange chapters, then I need written permission to read your chapter on the channel, along with your name or pen name and age. I also need permission from your parent or legal guardian if you are under 18 years of age. If you're 18 years old and have guardian permission, then I need a pen name to read your material. Writers may send their chapters in PDF or Word document format to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Mykela is spelled M-Y-K-E-L-A. Please do not send Google Docs. I'm not making any promises to read every chapter sent to me on the channel, but I intend to read all the chapters you send. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. I want to remind everyone that this story is at least PG-13, meaning if you are under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. This story is in its rough draft stage and needs many more passes of edits, but we will read it together. As you know, the title of the story is City of the Ancients, and today we are reading Chapter 12. Let's start. Chapter 12. The Chase Begins. In the morning, Kirsha jerked awake and quickly stood. Kieran was thinking he hadn't asked her if he could sleep next to her, but he quickly realized that wasn't the issue. Kirsha felt panic, so she spread out her feelings and searched. She turned to Kieran and said, "We need to pack the wagon and go. We can't stay here. We've left tracks. The dissenters know that Kilty is my sister." Kieran approached her slowly. "You must have had a bad dream or something. We're not in the village." "Bad dream?" said Kirsha. "Maybe, but it's a feeling that runs deep within me. I think we need to keep going, and we need to be on the lookout for a raft that will hold the horse and wagon." "That will be a very large raft," stated Kieran. He didn't like how nervous Kirsha seemed, so they quickly packed and headed out. Kilty was half asleep when they put her in the wagon, and soon she fell back asleep. Kieran reminded himself to look for a large raft, or something they could use as a raft. Kirsha magically erased what tracks she could, but she did it more from her wishes than she did from using a spell. Still, it worked. Around mid-morning, Mr. Parsons headed to Mr. Volkoff's house and shop. He rubbed his hands together in excited anticipation. Today was the day of the week that he bought a special sourdough bread, and then he and his wife would make sandwiches today and use the rest to make a special toast tomorrow. As he walked through the village, he greeted people just like normal. Then he arrived at his destination. When he entered, he didn't smell the wonderful smell he usually smelled. At least the smell wasn't as strong. Mr. Parsons stepped up to the counter and was about to ring the bell when he noticed Mr. Volkoff on the floor. Mr. Parsons rushed around the counter. He squatted down and found Mr. Volkoff dead. Then Mrs. Brocklands came in. "Hello, I'm here to pick up my cake," she said. Mr. Parsons rose up. "Get Dr. Highhands, quickly," stated Mr. Parsons. "It may already be too late." Miss Brocklands was about to ask why when she peeked over the small counter. "Ah, what did you do to him?" "I did nothing," said Mr. Parsons. "Didn't you see me enter just before you did?" He closed his eyes for a second. "Dr. High Hands." "Oh, yes, yes," said Mrs. Bruckland as she turned and hurried out. It wasn't long until many of the villagers crowded into the bakery, and then Mrs. Bruckland returned saying that Dr. High Hands was dead too. Dread passed through all the faces. This village didn't have troubles like suddenly having a dead body, but now they had two? Moreover, Mr. Volkoff's body showed no signs of stress, no cuts, no wounds, nothing to indicate how he died. Several went over to Dr. Highhand's office and found Dr. Highhands was the same way. Only someone or something trashed Dr. Highhand's office with books on the floor and files out of the cabinet. Suddenly, Mr. Parsons said, "What files? What files was whosoever looking for? I have files." He rushed out and rushed home. Several villagers were on his heels because someone said, "We need to watch him. He supposedly found Mr. Volkoff." Mr. Parsons realized the village suspected him, but he knew he was innocent. Then when he arrived home, the someone or something had ransacked his home as well. Papers were everywhere. "Patsy!" he called. "Patsy, oh, please be okay." His heart was racing. His throat was already restricted. With several villagers behind him, he hurried up the stairs. Just beyond the kitchen table, Mr. Parsons saw his wife on the floor. He rushed to her, but there were no signs of life. "No!" Mr. Parsons bellowed. "Who could have done this?" He hugged his wife's body to himself. The villagers that followed passed around a glance that said they knew that Mr. Parsons was not responsible for Mr. Volkoff's death. But that left a big question of who could have killed the three people, and what information were they looking for? Several villagers knew Dr. Highhands left for the port now and again to send a message or receive medicine. Of course, no one knew how he knew when a ship would be there, because the port was a ghost town. No one lived there. But every time he went, he came back successfully receiving or sending notes or medicine. So some in the village already didn't trust him much. But Mr. Volkoff was a baker. What would anyone want with him? Mr. Parsons had all the records of birth, marriage, death, so no one knew why anyone would want to ransack his files. The villagers decided to gather where they had held the dance for Kirian and Kirsch's marriage. They would discuss things there. Then they would search homes a few at a time. Suddenly, Kirsche shouted, There, Kirian, look, it's a raft. We need that to enter the castle, and we need to get in the castle as quickly as possible." Kirian looked at the raft. He wasn't exactly sure how to get the horse and wagon on the raft once the raft was in the river, but he was sure he couldn't push the raft into the river with the horse and wagon on it. The raft was plenty wide and long enough for the horse and wagon with walk space all around. Kilty sat up. "What's going on?" "We found a raft!" exclaimed Kirsche. "Wouldn't you like to ride a raft?" "Yes!" exclaimed Kilty. She looked over the wagon to see the raft. "Oh, wow! That will be easier to get the wagon on than when you loaded the cart on the little boat." "Yes," agreed Kirian. "I can drive the wagon right on it. But then, how do we get it in the river?" "Magic!" exclaimed Kilty. Kirian and Kirsche looked at her and realized they weren't thinking about magic. "My specialty, according to Mr. Volkoff, is wind," stated Kirsche. She held up her hands. "And I will be careful of my thoughts." Kirian drove the wagon onto the raft, but the logs were fairly thick, so he and Kirsche pushed the wagon as the horse pulled. Once they loaded the wagon, Kirian put on the brakes and went and stood by the horse's head to reassure the horse. Kirsha thought through her spells and chose one. She thought it was similar to the one she had helped Kilty with, but then she decided she didn't want to remove the ground beneath them, so she chose a different spell. Kirsha very carefully imagined how she wanted the spell to work, and then she said the spell. Kirian felt the raft slightly rise up, so he calmed the horse. Then they floated out over the water and then gently lowered to the water. That's when Kirian thought, "Oh no, I didn't check to see if the raft would float or not. Please float." Kirsha released her spell, and then the swiftness of the river took hold. And although it wasn't a very swift river, it was definitely faster than when they were hovering above. The horse was tremendously spooked, and Kirian was double glad that he had put the brakes on. Both Kirsha and Kirian sighed in relief. "Where is this river taking us?" asked Kilty. "Are we going to the city to find Mykela, or is it another castle?" "Kilty, do you remember the map you painted?" asked Kirsha, and Kilty nodded. "Do you know where we are on the map?" Kilty shook her head no. "Well, I suggest you figure it out, but to answer your question, we are going to another castle." "Can I explore again?" asked Kilty excitedly. "We want you to explore," stated Kirsha. "You have to help us find the orb keys. Without them, we can't get in the city." Kilty thought about cheering because she was going to get to explore, but then she realized there was an important task while they were exploring, so she didn't cheer. She did determine that she was going to look everywhere very carefully. "Oh, they travel so fast," stated Kirsha. Kirian looked past the horse at Kirsha. Her statement startled him. Then he glanced at Kilty and said, "Yes, we are going quite fast. Kilty, get your map and see how far we have to go to get to the castle." Kirsha looked at Kirian and realized that he was covering for her. They didn't want Kilty to panic or be scared. Kirsha climbed up in the wagon and helped Kilty get the map. Then Kirsha began teaching Kilty about direction, and she showed her where they started. Kilty still didn't quite understand, so Kirsha showed Kilty their first trip when they went to the cave, and then how they took the river home. At that point, Kirian realized that there was no bridge to cross the Essen River where he crossed, and Kirsha had the cart to pull. Granted, she made a bridge for them to cross the Longinus River as they traveled to the cave, and she probably could have made a bridge for her and Kilty to cross the Essen, but that hadn't been in his thoughts when he walked home without them. At that point, he still didn't believe in magic. Now he thought about some of what he read last night. He read about the essences of a person and how the ancients believed that the magic was available to everyone, not just magic users. Some of the history he read said that before technology, people could communicate with each other. But once technology came along, people didn't try their magic anymore. Then technology got so advanced that anyone could track people, not only their location, but what food they ate, when they went to bed, how long they slept, along with many other things. It became very scary. The dissenters used the technology to control people. There were battles, and afterwards the people who the ancients freed swore off technology, and they moved to the villages. And the ancients moved their city and locked it, so the dissenters couldn't enter and gain the technology again. Kirian came out of his thoughts as Kirsha was again asking Kilty where they were. "Don't worry if you're off a day or so. Just show me about where you think we are." "Well," started Kilty, we're in or on a river." She looked over the edge of the wagon. "Yes, on. We're definitely on." Kirian had chuckled and Kirsha smiled. Kilty found all the rivers on the map, and then she started at the village and across the bridge. "Last time we went along the river, and I think we went up," said Kilty to herself. Finally, Kilty explained, "This river here, we're on this river." Kirsha smiled. Yes. Now, your map doesn't have labels, but this river is called the Taurus River. Kirsha looked at Kirian. Should I sleep now and take your place later? I'm not sure the horse won't try to bolt, stated Kirian. How far to the castle? Too far, said Kirsha. Not far at all, replied Kilty. She held up her hand to show the space. It's about this far. Oh, there's something I forgot to teach, said Kirsha. Assuming, of course, that her map has a ratio, put in Kirian. They left it at that. Kirsha could feel the dissenters closing in on them. She didn't think they had made it to the bridge yet, but expected that they might before the day was out. She didn't know how she knew or felt that, but she felt they were traveling very fast. Kirsha thought about her orb and wondered if she could see the dissenters in the orb, and the thought tempted her to take the orb out and try. But instead she got the book City of the Ancients and started reading. A large crowd gathered at the sphere, not just the scientists. Arik and Arisha arrived, and the people parted to let them through. Everyone knew they had their own orbs to see their children, but the king and queen were choosing to be with their people. Apont said, Does someone wish to give an update? No one spoke, so Apont said, Kirsha awoke with a start, and she searched around herself. Something has her very scared. She mentioned the dissenters knowing that Kilty is her sister and needing to get to the castle. He paused. A scientist stepped forward. If I may add, Arisha motioned for him to continue. We contacted a few wise seers to see if we could learn anything. While Mr. Volkov did not answer, his sphere did show him dead. That probably should say orb. I'm going to edit that. His orb did show him dead. Arisha aspirated. She looked back at the sphere before her and saw her children alive. Did the sphere or orb still have the ability to replay any time? Stenthalfer asked Arik. Yes, replied Stenthalfer, the scientist. A dissenter tried to inhabit Mr. Volkov when he wouldn't confirm that Kilty was a sister. Mr. Volkov just repeated that Kilty was Kirian's daughter. I believe the dissenter was majority. Mr. Volkov was strong enough not to allow inhabitation, but he collapsed when majority withdrew. Still, he could have learned a lot, stated Arisha. Another scientist stepped forward. Several of us believe that Kirsha somehow knows something is wrong. Apont turned to the scientist. Whoa, Corthany, you can't just stop there. Arisha glanced at her father and then turned her attention to the scientist. Well, hesitated Corthany, there aren't many ways that we can look in our orbs or feelings and check on other people other than family. So that has made it hard to track the dissenters or check their activities. Another scientist raised his hand. Of course, my grandfather disagrees with this. He says we can check on anyone we don't intend harm. Arisha nodded her head towards the scientist. Yes, Loshum, I'm aware of your grandfather's theories, and he has proven himself capable many times. She turned back to Corthany. I believe there is a hypothesis that one way to check on a dissenter is after inhabitation. Yes, my queen, replied Corthany. Silence hung in the air for a few minutes. Arisha's hands went up to her mouth. Oh, I could not bear to watch Dante. But what you're saying is just a hypothesis, stated Corthany. Arisha glanced to her father and then turned to her husband. But Kirsha was still Kirsha. Arik gently placed his hands on his wife's upper arms and looked deep into her eyes. We know we got Kirsha's level wrong. He glanced past his wife to their father. Apont took his cue. A wise seer once told me that the past is gone, and you cannot alter it. The future may or may not come. What we have is today, right now. And right now, Kirsha is afraid of something. Whether majority tried on several occasions to inhabit Kirsha or not, we don't know. We do know that she is speeding them to Castle Westpolk. If they make it to the castle, there are protections there without Kirsha's magic. If they make it to the castle, then the best hope would be for the dissenters to pass them, stated Stentoffer, at least in my humble opinion. I disagree, stated Corthany. What if majority inhabits Mr. Valens? They passed glances around, and then the crowd turned back to watch the siblings float on the raft towards the castle. It was becoming dark in North Point Villa. They had buried the 3 bodies, but their searches hadn't produced anything. People were afraid to go to their houses alone, and some started whispering about other people among them. Mr. Parsons came back out of his home with a book and sat near the huge fire. Sit and listen. I found this book a few days ago and started rereading it. I think we need to remember this history. People cast wary glances around the circle, but they sat down, some on benches, some in chairs, and some on the ground like Mr. Parsons. The book Mr. Parsons had was a history book, and it talked about a time before they had given up technology. Many vaguely remembered that society was more technologically advanced before, and some remembered the why of giving technology up. But as Mr. Parsons read the book, he read of the ancients who developed a lot of the technology, and the dissenters who used the technology to try and gain control over the people. And then the dissenters turned the majority of people into slaves. It was a time of little food. Although the dissenters had plenty, the dissenters fed the people just enough to survive and work the next day. Mr. Parsons read how the ancients didn't like war, but chose to defend the people and free them. The condition was that the people could not use any technology they didn't create themselves. The ancients wanted the people to be masters of the technology, not enslaved by it. After Mr. Parsons read that, he looked up and around. He wanted to say that a few people had ideas of improving their lives, but the people dropped those ideas. So he didn't say anything. After a few minutes of silence, Miss Brocklin said, "The dissenters! My grandmother told me a tale. Her great-grandmother was a little girl when she met a dissenter, or I guess I should say saw. As a little girl, she wanted to scream, but she stayed hidden. The bodies had no marks, at least not until my grandmother's great-grandmother told them. And then they found a mark on the back of the head." The villagers looked around at each other. No one wanted to dig up the people they had just buried, but everyone wanted to know. After several more minutes of silence, Mr. Parsons said, "My wife, poor beautiful Patsy, she had the mark on the back of her head. I started reading the book several days ago, and it talks about that mark. Here, let me see if I can flip to it." Mr. Parsons skipped several pages, and then he started to read again. Before he read, he looked up and around. "Parents, this is quite gory." He waited a few minutes, and then he started reading to them once again. He first read the description of the dissenters in their natural form, and then he read about them changing to look like them. Then he read the description of them growing a rod from their forearm and inserting it in the back of a person's head. There were basically two purposes for this. One was to read a person's mind, and the other one was to merge themselves into the person's brain by inhabiting them. The dissenter could then live in the person's brain for approximately 6 months. When Mr. Parsons looked up from reading, he saw faces filled with dread and disgust, or both. The book goes further to say you can resist the gaining of knowledge or inhabitation, but it took a lot of power. Before this chapter, it mentioned dissenters gaining knowledge from a mind visit or something. I'm not sure if that is different, or the book saved the description. Okay, but I thought, started Mr. Don Tower, I thought the good guys locked the bad guys, the dissenters. I thought they locked them away. But what you're saying is the ancients, the good guys, are the ones locked away? They made us give up technology and they went and hid? Well, started Mr. Parsons. We were only to give up what we didn't create, put in Mr. Brooklyn. But we stopped creating. Those kids, started Mrs. Brooklyn. What if those dissenter things went after those kids? We need to warn them. The kids, as you call them, started Mr. Leister. They headed to Kirsch's village to give the news of their marriage. We can't get a hold of them. Mr. Parsons held up the book. There was a way before technology. We lost a lot when we gained the technology. When we had technology, we had phone lines all over the place, but the dissenters could tap a phone line and hear the whole conversation. Then we got rid of phones, but we didn't remember. Oh, what was that other word? He flipped a few more pages in the book, and then he said, telepathy. That's the word. Miss Brooklyn got up and walked over. Well, let me read that part. She took the book up in her hands. Ladies, let's sit at this table. It's close enough to the fire. We're going to read and learn how to do this telepathy thing. And we're going to warn those kids. The men exchanged glances, but they didn't move to dissuade the women. They did form a tighter circle among themselves and discussed what they could do to protect themselves from the dissenters. At one point, someone asked the question as to whether or not they could kill the dissenters. Mr. Don Tower answered, I'm not sure if we can kill them. The ancients had magic, and I thought the ancients magically locked the dissenters away. But anyway, I built a gun. He glanced around. You remember that bear that kept coming around here? Well, I shot it. I didn't kill it, but it hasn't been around here since. Maybe we don't have magic, but we can make guns. I've perfected the mold, and it's getting easier. He glanced around again. I didn't tell anyone because I get harassed every time I try to improve something. But the slingshot wasn't enough to keep the bear away from my daughter. I'm glad you made a gun, stated Mr. Parsons. Take a few men and show them how to make one. A few of us will rest, and a few will stand at the perimeter. The perimeter of the village square is probably sufficient for now. Later we can expand. Hopefully the ladies make progress. So, if you feel like your wife is talking in your head, then listen. They agreed and divided up. Kirsha rose up. She realized it was fully dark. She looked over to Kieran. I'm sorry I didn't take your place sooner. I guess I finally fell asleep. It's fine, stated Kieran as he moved in front of the horse and he moved around to the side of the wagon to climb up. He felt so stiff. So he walked around the back of the wagon to the other side and back again a few times. He walked from one side to the other a few more times before he finally climbed in. He wanted to read, but he was tired. He noticed that Kilty was already asleep. Kirsha thought about her orb, but she didn't want to drop it in the river, so she just petted the horse. The horse stamped his feet a few times, and Kirsha knew that he was feeling stiff as well. In the morning, Kieran awoke to Kirsha saying, Come on, Castle, come into sight. They're closing in on us. I feel it. Come on, come on. Kieran glanced at Kilty's sleeping form. He eased up and out of the wagon, As he walked down the side of the wagon, he saw the castle. As he got to Kirsche, he saw her looking behind them. Kirian turned and looked back the way they came. He couldn't see anybody or anything. Kirian could feel the tension in Kirsche. He said calmly, "The castle is ahead." "Yes, but the dissenters are closing in. I feel them," stated Kirsche. Kirian tried to think of what he could do. That's when he thought of Kilty. She accepted magic as real. Although she couldn't work her own spells yet, she believed. "I'll be back," stated Kirian. He walked back around the wagon and climbed up. Kirsche just watched him. Kirian opened Kilty's book and read through a few spells. "Ah, here is one. It speeds up the flow of water," stated Kirian. "Are you encouraging or asking me to work one of Kilty's spells?" asked Kirsche. "Yep," replied Kirian. He asked her if she was ready, and then he read the spell to her. Kirsche concentrated on the words and on what she wanted to accomplish. Shortly after she finished saying the spell, the horse was nodding his head, stomping his feet. Faster water was really spooking him. Kirian jumped down and walked around. He started trying to calm the horse. "You concentrate," he stated. "When we get to the castle." He paused. "Well, what did you do last time?" "I raised the gate," stated Kirsche. She looked back and Kilty was up. Kilty had climbed into the wagon seat. "You can do it again! I know it!" "She's using one of your spells," stated Kirian. "I know! It's awesome!" said Kilty. "I think I need her to work all of my spells, so I know what to expect." Kirsche briefly closed her eyes and shook her head to herself. She could feel Majorci getting closer. Although she didn't know his name, she knew, too, that he was with a group of friends. After an hour, they could see the gate. Kirsche dropped the spell for the faster flow, and she raised the gate. This time, she didn't think of the gate falling in the middle of their raft. She just thought of making it inside and the dissenters not seeing them. Once they passed the gate, Kirsche walked to the back of the raft and peered through the gate. She didn't see anyone, but she felt the dissenters were very close. She wanted to ask her father or her grandfather about the feelings, but she needed to be away from Kirian and Kilty. Yet, if the dissenters were close, she couldn't leave her siblings. They floated off the main vein to their left once again. Once they got to the large courtyard, Kirian pulled them to a ramp. He worked at tying off at the four corners. He didn't think he could get the wagon up the ramp. But he hoped he could get the horse up it. The horse protested at first, till he stepped down on stone. The stone had half logs at several intervals sucked down into the stone, so someone wouldn't slide back down. And the grade wasn't very steep, so Kirian made it to the top with the horse. Kirsche had started gathering some of their things to carry up. "I got a question," said Kilty. "If we have magic, then why do we have to carry everything? Can't you make the things float up the ramp?" "We don't have magic to be lazy," stated Kirsche. "But I do like your idea." Kirsche went through a list of spells and then magically lifted her things to the courtyard, beside the horse. After she magically set the things down, she felt Majorci. She walked to the wall in the east and placed her hands on the wall. Kirsche felt a pulsing in her hands, and then she could see through the wall, like the wall was a window. However, Kirian and Kilty just saw the wall. When Kirsche saw the group of dissenters, she shuddered. She didn't know they couldn't see her, so she quickly took her hands off the wall and squatted down to hide from their sight. Kilty started for Kirsche, but Kirian put his hand on her shoulder. Kilty glanced up at Kirian, and he slightly shook his head no. "She knows more than she tells, but I think it's scary for her," stated Kirian. Kilty just looked at Kirsche. She wanted to run to her and hug her. Apont let out a sigh of relief and put his hands to his face. After a few more minutes, he dropped his hands down and took in several deep breaths. That was too close. I now know why Arisha is so sick with worry. I cannot watch any more today. He turned and walked away from the sphere. The scientists watched him walk away. After he was out of earshot, one scientist said, "Kirsha can use the defenses of the castle. I thought that was good." "But if Kirsha hadn't used water magic, the dissenters would have found them and killed them," stated another scientist. "And Kirsha only used the water magic because she could feel the dissenters getting too close to her," stated a third scientist. "But again, Kirsha used a magic that wasn't her specialty or strength. I thought that was very good. That means she can use Kilty's orb. I think that's a great hypothesis with what I just witnessed," said a fourth scientist. The scientists discussed several things and then dispersed as more scientists came to take their places. Okay, writers, that's the end of chapter 12. On Tuesdays, I've talked to you about writing that your characters went fishing and you would have to decide on whether or not to leave the scene in. I think entering the castle is like the fishing I mentioned. It is definitely a scene that interrelates action. My characters are resting. The three friends or siblings were a bit leisurely in their traveling until Kirsha felt the dissenters. I really built some tension in this chapter. Even the ancients who are safe in their city were worried about the siblings. Opponent or the grandfather had too high a level of stress to even stay and watch anymore. Kirian felt Kirsha's stress or tension, but he doesn't really have a clue at this point what caused the tension. We also got to glance back at the village and see the tragedy there. The reason that is interrelated is because now the reader knows 3 people died from the dissenters trying to enter their minds, or to enter the minds of the villagers. And from the ancients you learned that is quite possibly tried on Kirsha. If you didn't understand Kirsha's fear before, or the torture that she spoke about before, hopefully you see more a reason why now. We still have some more of Kirsha's past to reveal. Leave a comment down below on whether or not you feel you or one of your characters could withstand or prevent such a dissenter's probe into your mind or your character's mind. Or perhaps leave a comment on what your thoughts are on telepathy or any of the extrasensory perceptions. I enjoy writing ESP things into my stories. ESP is like magic to many people around us because they don't believe in the possibility of it. But in my stories, I push the envelope. Idiom alert, idiom alert. Push the envelope means to approach or extend the limits of what is possible. With magic involved in my fantasies, it is easy to add ESP beyond what science knows is possible. I hope you enjoyed chapter 12 today. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and the bell so you can continue writing with me. Also, I'm ready for you to send your chapter 12. Send your PDF or Word document to writewithmykela@gmail.com. Visit my website and read about the characters in Mykela, or read about half of the team and the operatives and 5 characters from the City of the Ancients. My website is www.bymykela.com. That's www.bymykela.com. Leave a comment on how many bios you've read so far, or let me know your favorite characters so far. On Tuesday, we will have a writing prompt. I think it's time to write about the 2 caves. One peaceful and relaxing, and one very scary one. On Friday, we will read chapter 13 from the City of the Ancients, Castle Westpolk. I hope to see you both days. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Mykela with Write with Mykela. Bye for now.